I continue with the topic of paradigm shift by reading from Roma Chatterjee, as I mentioned in the previous lecture. So, in this part, I am going to read out some of the parts. So, I am using this book as a reference, that is Roma Chatterjee's Speaking with Pictures, that is written by Roma Chatterjee, Speaking with Pictures, Folk Art and the Narrative Tradition in India, and printed by Routledge publication. So, here she writes, the storytelling potential of Gond art is increasingly being tapped by new forms of narration such as film and storybooks. Gond artists are in great demand as illustrators for children's stories, cartoons and other such educational projects. In another part, she is writing, Tara Douglas, the British animator who lives in New Delhi and runs the Adivasi Art Trust, an association that promotes Indian tribal art through animation, collaborated with Leslie Mackenzie, an animator based in Scotland, to develop a project called the Tallest Story Competition in 2001 to 2003. 4 folk tales were animated during different Adivasi art styles. Leslie Mackenzie, who directed the Gond film, chose cutout animation as the technique that was best suited to Gond art style of patterned shapes. A workshop was organized in Bhopal to which 14 Pradhan Gond artists were invited, and Leslie Mackenzie worked with them to create the artwork. The stencils demonstrating the animation poses were prepared in Scotland, and the Pradhan Gond artists only had to fill and color them in, using their distinctive patterns as texture. Each character was cut out and the body parts separated. Then the separated parts were fixed back together with blue tack, creating 2-dimensional puppets. The characters were then animated by moving the puppets in small increments, captured frame by frame on the video camera. The characters seemed to move when the scene was played back. Now, according to Roma Chatterjee, to her experience, she gave it a very different analysis. In the appreciation of the whole visual experience, she felt that whenever one image is created in Gond art and then it's represented or re-represented in a very different form, where all the images, the kind of imaginary animals that they have, they're categorically cut out, and from one particular image they are moving towards another paradigm in terms of its expression. That one was the illusion of movement created to them, the other one is the actual movement through animation that was provided to them. So, it is a gap that has to be filled up with much more care. And in all these projects, we have seen that the images are not naturalistic, but when it gets a paradigm shift, it becomes an animation. Then the movements are naturalistic. So, there finds that contradiction has to be carefully tackled. So, it is not only the paradigm shift, but also how we are shifting it. When we are talking about alternative, it has to be an alternative in the true sense. It cannot contradict with the existing principle. That may create a lot of hindrance into the process of viewing. So one had to be very careful to address and handle the issue. In the same context, she is writing that Pradhan Gond painters have a variety of different ways in which they depict birds in flight. Sometimes they stream out like watery columns or are fluid shadows framing the bird's body like a fiery halo. Some birds seem to be wingless, like the hapless bird that lies on its back with its beak open, desperately trying to swallow drops of rain that might fall from the parched sky overhead. Birds do not always look like birds in the tradition. Sometimes they look like fabulous creatures from another world, and that is the characteristic of Gond. In another context, she shares her experience and she says that by the time I arrived at the workshop, the stories for animation had already been selected. The choice of story was detected by the fact that it indeed no dialogues and therefore no complicated lip sync movements. The Gond story, The Squirrel's Dream, Gilhari Ke Sapne, is a much loved story and often illustrated by Pradhan Gond artists. To think of it as a single story is somewhat of a misnomer, as it, like all other traditional Gond stories, has many variants. So the story is like that. There was a squirrel that lived on a tree. She was very despondent and wished that she could be someone else. Perhaps if she was a flower, she would be happy. But then she saw a bee sipping nectar from the flower. Perhaps it would be better to be a fruit instead. As soon as these thoughts came to her mind, she was magically transformed. She became a flower and then a luscious fruit, but then she saw a bird coming towards her and was frightened as she suddenly remembered the birds eat fruit. The squirrel transformed herself into a bird only to nearly fall prey to a fox. She managed to evade the fox and decided that it would be better to become a powerful animal like the fox rather than a small bird. But no sooner had she taken on the shape of a fox than she was confronted by the mighty lion, the king of the jungle. She next took on the form of the lion, but the lion, she thought, can be killed by wily predators like jackals, who may look small but have weapons and can fell even lions. The smell of a jackal's urine is so powerful that it can even disorient large animals like the lion, as the traditional story talks about. So the squirrel then decided to become a jackal only to be confronted by man, the most powerful predator in the forest. The squirrel decided that the human form is the best of all. All animals are afraid of humans, she thought. But she had not taken into account the conflictual world that humans live in, torn by myriad different wants and desires. She came to realize that the human world was the worst of all the many worlds that she had experienced. It was better to be a squirrel after all. Now she describes the process of animation. The story had to be summarized keeping in mind Tara's dictum that we had all heard that morning. The most successful animated stories follow a beginning to end structure. The objective has to be clear at all times. It begins with the setup stage where we introduce the audience to the setting, characters, and circumstances of the story. It is followed by the conflict stage, that is, the point in the storyline where things start to go wrong for the characters. Then finally, we have the resolution stage, the point in the movie when the conflict we have introduced come to the climax, it resolved. A failed story is when the audience is confused about the end. In an oral tradition, there is much dialogue and many side stories. In animation, there is more action, less dialogue, and a simple storyline. A film should be a fulfilling storytelling experience and an expression of characterization and personality. There was a moment of confusion when the NID students who were advised the group asked about the motivation of the story, what it was about. Tara had talked about the financial aspect. Animation is an expensive business, and the artists had to think of a long line, the saransh. A few sentences that would give a prospective investor or distributor the immediate sense of what the story was about. Narmada Prasad and Venkat, the two most articulate members of the Gond team, said that the theme was motivation enough. The story recorded the lifetime of all creation from birth to death. The squirrel's dream was the dream of each Atma or the soul. The squirrel represents the Atma. Narmada Prasad said, we have to go through 84 wombs to be born as human. 84 lakh, Venkat corrected. Man is the biggest animal of all, but even he is scared of something. Man is scared of life. But the NID students were not satisfied. There must be a reason why the squirrel is dissatisfied. We will have to show it in the film. See, there the shift in paradigm is happening. So one has to also give it into its completion, because it's not just the complements of the folk tale, but this is a animation film, a complete animation film, it's complete into it. So they went over the story step by step according to the logic of animation. The story had contributions which made the motivation of the main protagonist unclear. The story was divided into stages, each stage is determined by the transformation of the squirrel. The motivation for transformation was clear to the student. The squirrel changes into that which she most fears at the particular moment. But in the beginning, she envies the beauty of the flower. That too is understandable, but why should she change into a fruit when she sees the bee approaching? So, it was decided that instead of a fruit, the next transformation should be into a bee. Ravi, Narmada Prasad's teenage son, who probably had the most experience with modern forms of storytelling such as cartoons, was not convinced that the fox posed a threat to the bird. Birds can fly away, he said. The logic of the original story is such that the successive stages of transformation are determined by the idea of sentience. Flower and fruit are inanimate, birds and bees can fly, the animals are all earthbound, but four-legged like the squirrel, except for the man who walks on two legs. It was decided that the storyboard, the pictorial script, which animators use to maintain continuity, would depict the bird as a low flying one. There were further problems. Apart from the older Pradhan Gond artist, no one present had heard about the potency of jackal's urine. The artists were reminded that the film would be viewed by children who were unfamiliar with the Gond milieu. As one would expect, the jackal avatar was dropped from the script. The artists were asked to think about the profile of their characters, their motivations and personalities, where they were situated and why, and so on. She writes the detailed description of the making, but our focus is right now on the different possibilities of the medium. When we are shifting from a oral tradition which involves oration, images, performances, etc., when we are putting it into a different light, making animation out of it, of course it has certain potential, but it may also give us a very different thought. One that we discussed, that when we are making those images which are otherwise not representational, they are very non-objective, often semi-abstract. In fact, when we call something a bird, it may not even look like a bird, it may look like some other creature. So these are the line, texture and other things which are very pleasing, and they are almost like a parallel form that is made here. So when we animate them in a naturalistic manner, how everything moves, that may not suit the context. And the second thing is the kind of local ethos. When we give it a universal form, we need to take care of that also, and the whole task needs a lot of local intelligence, rather the social intelligence. So it's not the intelligence that is restricted to a community or to a nation, but it's widespread, and we need to know the different age group, the user groups, and cater to them accordingly. So from here I am moving to another experience which is shared by her into the context, though it's not very fair to read the books partially, but this is the best way I can present it. But I would like you to read the full book to know many more case studies and extensive field works that is involved into the work. So the other experience. Roma Chatterjee writes, I now turn to another variant of the story called Chameleon's Dreams, Girgit Ke Sapne, given to me by Mangru Wiki. Mangru, a school-educated artist, has been collecting stories from his older relatives in Patangarh to be used later as themes for his pictures. I have been able to acquire paintings of at least 4 narrative series of Mangru. As a literate artist, Mangru treats the story as a text and tries to match the sequence of episodes in the story to the images that he paints. He always describes the sequence of actions that make up the particular episode being depicted at the back of the picture in writing. Individual paintings in the series are numbered to indicate the order in which events occur in the narrative. Even though Mangaru's story has a similar episodic structure to that of the squirrel's dream, it differs in some important aspects, and we can make that out. This is more like when the squirrel changes, it changes its form, and here when the girgit or the chameleon changes, it also changes its color to match the context. So, the substitution of the squirrel by a chameleon is the main protagonist, brings the message into sharper focus. The chameleon takes on the image of its environment by changing its color. It has no identity of its own. In Mangaru's rendition of the story, the dream motive recurs frequently. Unlike the story recounted in the animation script, where the dream finds scant mention, the chameleon goes from one dream state to another without waking up. So, the basic aim of picking up this kind of graphic novel or animation projects are perhaps the same. It is to reach out the new audience, to sustain, to find out a new audience, new group of audience, and survive in that way. The stories must survive, the artists must survive, and the artworks, the style, the creation, the identities, everything needs to survive for justified reasons. In fact, as we discussed earlier also, that when we were in a lookout as a nation for a particular idiom that came through the folk and tribal art to us, and this was the indigenous and the vernacular characteristic of the art form that gave us our identity. So there are many reasons why we feel that in today's context the story can play a very vital role, and there's no end of storytelling, as we know that the demand of new stories are not to be vanished ever. It's going to survive for long, but it's only the way how we are going to tell the story, in what form it's going to come to the new audience, that remains a very big question. So in today's context, when we look at storytelling and we talk about paradigm shift, we see that every medium has its limitation. So it's not as easy to put it in this context that if we convert them into animation, it's going to sustain forever. So we can also reconsider these things, realizing their potential success, the possibilities of their success, that this is not the only way out. And paradigm shift is just one way out. And shift in paradigm may happen in many different ways. They can purely survive as pure forms of artistic expression. It can also find out its new place into the museums, galleries, and other places. So paradigm shift is just one of the possibilities that we realized through this discussion. But there are many other ventures that are being made in this direction, and it's going on. So we must also be in a constant lookout to find them and get into the research and extend it further.